Okay, so I mentioned brinkmanship, threatening to go to the brink of war, used in Korea and Taiwan. And the thing is, now the United States, we have what's called a nuclear triad. What this means is that there are three different ways that the United States can deploy nuclear weapons if we deem necessary. One is by long range bombers. The U.S., we now have the B 52 bombers can take off from the United States and make it to Europe, can take off from Europe and make it to China. They can make it to the Soviet Union. No place around the world is immune from B 52. And then we have submarines. Our submarines are now able to launch missiles that can contain nuclear warheads. And then we have missiles themselves, or ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles. Um, we have some of these in Western Europe, and they're pointed right at the Soviet Union. We have some in Turkey pointed at the Soviet Union, and this is going to be a source of contingency later on between the U.S. and Russia. Something else that was going on in the United States. Um, Now that there's talk, now that this Red Scare is going on, and there's talk of the Soviets now have nuclear capability, and people are talking about, well, we saw what happened at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and those were with um, atomic bombs. Now we have hydrogen bombs, which are even more powerful. And a guy by the name of Philip Wiley wrote a book called Tomorrow. And when this book came out, it just scared the bejesus out of people. Because in Philip Wiley's book Tomorrow, he didn't talk about, his focus wasn't on what happens when a nuclear bomb explodes. It was what happens the day after, and the day after that, and the day after that, and the day after that. And when you have all this nuclear fallout that reaches up into the upper levels of the atmosphere, because when a nuclear bomb detonates, when they tested, when they did the test at Trinity uh, in Almaguerra, New Mexico, the plume from that bomb went up 40, 50,000 feet. You're talking 10 miles or so up into the atmosphere, and all those radioactive particles are gonna go up there. And the thing is that those radioactive particles aren't just gonna fall straight back down. They're gonna go up. They're gonna get caught up in the jet stream, and then they're gonna get carried away, and they will eventually make it back down to Earth. But that could be 100, 150, 200 miles from where the bomb went off. And when that radioactivity makes it back down to Earth, it's just as strong as where the bomb detonated. And so, um, this was called nuclear fallout. And so they said, well, people need to dig fallout shelters. And so people started to go out in their backyard, and they started to dig, basically burrow into the ground like a prairie dog. And they were told that you need to keep at least a couple weeks supply of food and water down there, because if a nuclear bomb does go off, it's going to be at least a week, 10 days, maybe 14 days before it's going to be safe to come outside. And so people were digging these fallout shelters, as they were called. And had we been in school, I'd pull up this website that actually shows a place that still builds underground bomb shelters today. They build them, they come out to your place, they dig a huge hole in the ground, they put it in there, and it's kind of if you watch the video advertising this place, it's pretty comical. But unfortunately, we're not going to get a talk about that right now. Then, just when the United States thinks that things can't get any worse, in 1957, the Soviets launch Sputnik, or as they called it, Sputnik. And it's the first unmanned or first satellite, manned or unmanned, first satellite to orbit the Earth. And the U.S. has no idea that the Soviets are working on this at all. And then they launch it. And the United States realizes how far behind the Soviet Union we really are. We've been so focused on building weapons and building nuclear weapons and long-range bombers and missiles and submarines that can launch missiles. And the Soviets they're not worried about what's going on right here within our hemisphere, our atmosphere. They're looking at outer space. And so they launched Sputnik. And of course, the fear then is if they can put a satellite into space, is it possible that they could attach a nuclear bomb to this? There's no way you can shoot a satellite down. And it's not long that then they got to figure out, well, we got a satellite to go up. Are we going to be able to, and when I say we, I'm referencing the Soviets, are we going to be able to put a person in there? Well, they had to run some experiments first. They put a dog inside of the capsule, launched it. Unfortunately, the dog didn't last because when the satellite re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, it got too hot inside of the capsule and the dog perished. But the Soviets knew what they needed to do, and so then it wasn't long. Soviet cosmonaut. We call them astronauts. In Russia, they call them cosmonauts. I believe his name was Yuri Gagarin. Was the first human to orbit Earth in a satellite, and so that scares the heck out of the United States. And then the U.S. Eisenhower decides, well, let's just try to keep communism from spreading into the Western Hemisphere. And so he's going to, in countries where it looks like countries that are ripe for maybe communist takeover, the United States is going to conduct some covert operations. They do this in Guatemala. They do it in Iran. It keeps these countries from becoming communist. And so they're going to continue to go ahead and do that. And then what happens is that in the mid-50s, Joseph Stalin dies. Actually, I want to say it's like 53. Stalin dies. And so there's a couple years where the Soviets are basically leaderless. Well, then eventually Nikita Khrushchev takes over. And actually Khrushchev and Eisenhower kind of hit it off. And they're working towards détente, which is basically just it's a French word for peace. And they agree that Khrushchev and Eisenhower are going to meet. Well, what happens is that in the meantime, the United States, we're conducting some spy missions, if you want to call them that. We have U-2 spy planes that are flying over Russia, and they have very sophisticated cameras, at least very sophisticated for that time period. These planes can fly at extremely high altitudes. We're talking 40,000 feet. And these planes are very lightweight, extremely lightweight, so they can travel at very high speeds, and hopefully not be detected. In fact, they're so light that they don't even have an ejection seat for the pilot, because that adds too much weight. So if a pilot has to eject, they basically have to pull a pin that pops the canopy, and then they have to somehow jump out of the plane and hopefully get far enough away from it before they can parachute. Well, what happens is the Soviets detect a U-2 spy plane flying in their airspace. They launch a surface-to-air missile. Now, what happens is the missile doesn't hit the plane itself, but what it does is it detonates close enough to it that it sends like shock waves through the sky, and that's able to knock out the U-2 spy plane's jets. Um, the pilot, Francis Gary Powers, is able to eject or pull the pin that releases the canopy, and he's able to get out of the plane. He parachutes down. He and the plane are captured by the Soviet military, and then right away Khrushchev is on the phone to Eisenhower, and he's asking Eisenhower, hey, I thought we had a trust with one another. You're spying on us. What's going on? Eisenhower plays stupid. I don't know what you're talking about. And Khrushchev says, well, we just shot down one of your planes. And he says, oh, well, it was a weather plane, and it was an unmanned plane. And he said, no, we have the pilot. And he says, oh, well, it's just a weather plane collecting meteorological data. And he says, well, if it's collecting meteorological data, then what's up with all this high-tech, photography equipment aboard? And Eisenhower realizes that, Khrushchev knows exactly what's going on. And so Eisenhower says, you know what? Okay, yes, my apologies. We were spying on you, but, we've been doing it for a while now. I don't know why you're acting all surprised and everything. And Khrushchev says, that's it. You've betrayed my trust. Our meeting is off. And just when it looks like the Cold War was maybe on the verge of being over with, it's not. And it continues for another 30 plus years. So that gets us to the end of chapter 21. Chapter 22 lecture videos will follow.